two, three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
This is
from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network, the episode, The Monday Morning Quarterback, on the 9th of March, 2020. On Sunday, we celebrated Worldwide International Women's Day. There were marches from Islamabad in Pakistan to Mexico City and points in between across the Americas, Washington, D.C., and various other places. The Industrial Center of Monterrey, women were there. And today is very similar to what happened in the U.S. Over 15 years ago, a day without, they call it a day without Mexicanos, but in Mexico it's a day without women. And millions of women will just simply stay home. This is to demonstrate the importance of women in the economy in Mexico, and that is a worldwide situation. Also, the demonstration in Mexico and across the Americas, particularly in what's called Central America, that area is, and that would also extend to in the U.S. The death of women in the U.S., the death of Aboriginal women or Native American women that are just literally being killed and not heard from in Mexico. It is a constant situation. That is not unusual to have 10 women killed in one day. And the attitude of the authorities in Mexico, it's ingrained there, and it has gotten worse with these right-wing movements as they are in many parts of the world. And that goes into Pakistan, other sorts of places, honor killings, and other backward ideas, and they tend to still be fertile ground in many places. The government there under Mr. Manuel Obrador has attempted to address the problem, and he is still in the process, he and his government are. He talked about, in reaction to a woman being murdered, that there were problems from neoliberalism. We would agree with President Lopez Obrador there, but at the same time there has to be not only a change of mindset, but regulations form a mindset. There needs to be a new leadership in the police forces, in the federal efforts, and in the various states in Mexico. That's what has to happen. They have to simply investigate these murders, and many of the murders are carelessly investigated. We heard one story of a woman, a young woman, literally being assaulted, raped, etc. And when the police caught, there were a boyfriend, a friend of his, and one other individual. They did finally get around to arresting these people, but by that time all of the evidence had disappeared, like condoms, etc. We don't know what happened. They were evidently thrown in the trash. And that has happened in the U.S. in terms of what they use in the states here, rape kits. In some states there have been rape kits have been 5 or more years. They're in storage and have never really been utilized. And that callous attempt is on the part of the police authorities. That rests with the leadership there. And this is what President Lopez Obrador has to do, is provide leadership. It's not correct just to talk about chismo, but you have to do something about it. And if you do something about it, then it tends to get to be to start addressing it. You have to arrest people, and they do arrest people, but the problem is when it comes to the evidence, many times it's lost. Many times the prosecutions are half-hearted. As a reverse of what happens in many times in the U.S., you have people that are prosecuted that did not commit the crime, period. And you'd say, well, why do they have all of a sudden so much violence in many of these cities? Well, it's the illegal narcotics trade, no doubt about that, in places like Juarez, even in Acapulco, which used to be a paradise, a cheaper paradise for Americans, various other tourist entities in Mexico. I remember living in Juarez at one time, and you could walk the streets into the night. You could stand on the streets, no problem at all. That was in the 80s. So it was a different kind of, across from El Paso, incidentally, a different type of situation that occurred. But a lot of that is economic distancing, we'll call it, between the classes, and that is what's happening. Yes, you've had some prosperity in parts of Mexico where they have manufacturing. The professional class there is growing, but at the same time you have this income inequality which you have all across the country. You have it in Lebanon, but it's about to collapse. You have the same thing going on in many countries, in Nigeria, in Ghana, particularly in Ghana, in South Africa. You have this based upon class, based upon race. You have all these dividing situations out there, and based upon agenda. This is where things need to be addressed. In the last part, when we leave here, there we have two different segments, one from Meet the Press and one from ABC's This Week, George Stephanopoulos. They're both interviewing Bernie Sanders and his take on Super Tuesday and the way forward. And we have here from Joe Biden. He's speaking about his great unifier and what's the consequences of these many Democratic candidates. The latest one is Kamala Harris. If you recall, Kamala Harris attacked Joe Biden in the debate. That was when she was crowned queen for a day or a week or whatever it was, with his efforts in busing. It's no doubt Biden was from Delaware. The parts of Delaware are in the South, just like parts of Maryland. People need to understand that. And Joe Biden went along with the to get along and supported or opposed, busing, and not to the point that we had on Hicks in South Boston, but basically it was the same situation, and that was what Bernie was trying to look on the record of Joe Biden. Is that effective to attack what Joe Biden did more than 10 years ago? 10 years ago. 2008, he got on the ticket with Barack Obama, and then 8 years of that. So we're talking beyond that. We're now in 2020. So you have to understand how you frame your issues. And I think part of that is the management that Bernie Sanders has now and how they're framing the issues. And he's talking about such things as youth turnout. It didn't get to be what he had anticipated. And part of that is that it takes a while to a time period to develop that type of consciousness. It doesn't develop overnight. Yes, youth are attending his rallies, and some of them go there as just a cause celebre. In other words, they appear there because their friends appear there, and some go vote and some don't go vote. Period. So that is some of the things to overcome. Well, we go back to the basic premise of Bernie's campaign in 2016 and also in 2020. It is all about building a movement. Now Joe Biden did a flippable and claimed he's building a movement. We wonder a movement to where? More capitalism? I'm a Bernie supporter. That is it. But the whole point there is it's beyond Bernie and Joe Biden. This is about capitalism, and we see more and more of that appearing every day with the COVID-19 and the state of the American healthcare system. You have DJ Trump going out telling people, and many of the conservatives, the finest healthcare system in the world. That is blatantly false. Period. Yes, more money per capita is spent on healthcare, but it's a dodgy, as Dave Jones down in Australia would say. And now we're seeing the tests. Pence, who they put in charge, a man that doesn't believe in science, and Bernie is finally coming to confront the issue of science. He talked about it. You hear him talk about it after we leave here, and he's also hosting a round table on COVID-19. Should be done, because this is the sentinel moment in American healthcare since I'm going back of us old timers to the polio and Jonas Salk and his vaccine. And remember standing in lines, getting the vaccine and getting it on a sugar cube. That was when people gladly took the vaccines. We did not have an anti-vaccine movement. And now you deal with that, and much of that is coming out of the same conspiracy theorists that supported DJ Trump and his birth certificate campaign, or birthers campaign, or whatever they want to call it. And then they turned into the Tea Party. For those that remember, the Tea Party was a party that opposed the bailout. Now Bernie's talking about that. He voted against it. But that was an organization that came out of the back room of a Republican consultants. They put the money in it, they founded it, they financed it, and they went out there talking about such things as opposing the Affordable Care Act, the bailout, and those kinds of things that working people said, well, you're giving all this money to the rich. What they didn't anticipate was in 2016, the so-called cleaning up of the swamp. The administration came into the office literally riding on the SS Trump that was sailing down the swamp, and all these various billionaires, a few millionaires in between, are on the ship, and they literally got the net and they're collecting up whatever they can get. Menace, Guffies, everything. So that is what about the spoils, and people have really never comprehended that. So this is a thing that campaigns needs to be working on. Bernie needs to talk about the COVID-19 and how this system is delivering, how people are going to pay for these so-called quarantines. Now they have old Lion Ted Cruz. He's self-quarantining. Well, he has to quarantine because he came in contact at CPAC with an individual that is now has the COVID-19 certificate on his head, literally. And various other people that were shaking hands with him. DJ Trump claimed that it was not around him. I'm certain that the White House authorities tested old DJ. But this just tells you how this particular virus is out here, and its effects eventually, depending on what's happening, we can look as a blueprint out in Washington State, Kirkland, Washington, and those areas that have all of these cases. The healthcare workers themselves are being literally beaten down into the road, as the late great Jerry Pippin would say. They are being exhausted. There was an interview with a young internist there, and he had been in contact with some patients, and he was self-quarantining. Or when he was not, his wife was self-quarantining because she had actually treated someone and it showed some symptoms, and she's getting tested. The last interview, that the results of that test had not been out there yet. One of the problems is Governor Cuomo was talking about they have 7 or 8 sites in New York State, and in that particular state they want to do testing, but they haven't been certified by the people in Atlanta, who has had their staffs cut by none other than the Trump administration. Now those are the things Bernie should talk about, and this in the real lives of real people, and how people are going to pay for these 14 and plus days that they'll be quarantined, and many of them don't have sick leave, or don't have sick days, or don't have the financial resources, and they had injury. Some of these commercial types want to get in and do the testing. Well, you guess who is going to get the bill for that testing? The patient, the consumer. And the dodgy insurance companies wait, and they may or may not pay for it, as happened with this BBC report. It was not the COVID-19 test, but she just broke an arm. And literally these upfront costs, she had to use the credit card to take care of it, and it was almost $10,000. She had a good line of credit, evidently. And now she's was getting information from the hospital and their billing departments. They went after her and to certify but actually what had happened, and the insurance companies in the process, eventually they will reimburse her, but they have her money up front. Those are holes in the system are inexcusable. I was talking with a right-winger the other day, and he had health insurance, yes, but the health insurance he had high copays, so he was not going to the doctor to even get his annual physicals. I forget what he said, $100 or $200 for the physical. The test involved, had to pay for that. So these are some of the real things that people are dealing with. And in Michigan, you have Flint, you have the water crisis there, you have bad water. All that goes into what is happening. People they're already sick. Here comes COVID-19, and they have problems. Period. In Michigan. So you have to look at that and get past these so-called endorsements by the Kamala Harris of the world. And Bernie talks about the mayor from South Bend, Pete, otherwise known as CIA Pete, and Amy Klobuchar. They were forced to do what they did. Amy Klobuchar says she was at a church service, and she didn't say she had a divine revelation or anything, but at the same time, she's basically saying that it was the Ed Pettis Bridge. Bernie was not there at that. Bernie should have been at that. A lot of this is the management of the campaign. Bernie is focused on economic issues, and we comprehend that. But unfortunately, in the American system, you have to deal not only with the economics of the situation, the class, but you have to deal with the various groupings. If you're appealing to Latinos, you have to appeal to African Americans. And so Bernie is spending time in Michigan now, and he cut appearances, say, in a place like Mississippi, where he obviously had no chance at all of winning anything. And this is, we talked about this in the last two programs, when you look at Mississippi, Alabama, those very, very red states, what Joe Biden does there is inconsequential. The same with South Carolina. But you have to understand the corporate media, in line with Bloomberg and the rest of those people, are pushing Biden like he's a super person. He's not. He is a minimal candidate. And one thing we've not heard in this debate out here, these conversation pundits, what happens if Biden stumbles? Well, the big question marks are there, 3 or 4 of those. He could stumble or whatever. In fact, the way things are going now, and he's not holding a lot of rallies, but, you know, in his late 70s, Bernie also, some of their people, someone in the audience, could get the COVID-19 virus, and they would be joining, well, not joining, but they'd be in the same boat as Lion Ted Cruz. Same with DJ Trump. We may, in fact, see before this game is over, these bigger rallies, particular ones in enclosed places. Now, you're outside, it's different, you have fresh air there, but Dr. down at CDC was talking about what they now call social distancing. In other words, the old rule, 2 to 4 feet apart, impossible basically on subways and things of that nature, but they're talking about that out in Washington State and in California. They're advising seniors 60 years old to stay out of large crowds, and then Dr. Fauci was talking about advising seniors not only that and social distancing, but not to go on those damn cruises. Stay off of the cruises. It's bad enough to have to fly on the aeroplane on long distances, unless absolutely necessary. Sometimes people have to go long distances. That's just what they do. But you basically have to, get your rest, etc. And go to the CDC site. I think we also, on some of our broadcasts, I have a numbers man on the Boston Red political side, put the latest information up there from WHO, the World Health Organization. Trump has ever, ODJ, he went to the point to say that the numbers that they have exaggerated. Well, for those of us that work with numbers or statistics, generally speaking, not all the time, but most of the time, countries put the best foot forward. And in these kinds of epidemics, it's like, so you get the flu, 20,000 people caught the flu. Usually, that's just the official numbers, kind of like the unemployment. But you don't get all of the people, because everyone that has the flu, like I've had the flu, and we didn't go to the medical center. We had to cancel an appointment with one of our physicians, I guess a cardiologist, because we had the damn flu. Now, we didn't have a temperature, but we had everything else. We were coughing, you name it. Anyway, that happens. But the same thing is with these mild cases with COVID-19. Many of the people just tend to get through it, and like a flu, and then they get better. And those people are not counted. And there are also people that die that aren't counted because, again, depending on where they die. I mean, you have 1 billion plus people. It's easy for somebody to die and not be recorded. Just die of natural cause. That's what happens in the U.S., natural causes. So all of these things are out there, and they affect real people. And that's what the candidates should start talking about. You won't hear Biden talk very much about that. He's now talking about he's starting a movement. Now, what kind of movement is he starting? We don't know. What we do know is the DNC, at the very beginning, under Perez, was anti-Bernie. The officials in the Democratic Party, from state chairs on down, most of those people are anti-Bernie because they're beholden to Joe Biden. And the same thing happened down there with Mr. Claiborne, Representative Claiborne down in South Carolina. He has his little leadership position. He's number 3 in line. He should be number 2. But that's one of the situations that he put the political screws to some mayors that were going to meet with CIA PD. But the meeting was called off. The screws were out there. Period. It's like LBJ used to say, it was basically, and this is, I guess you'd say, I'm not sure of this term. Anyway, testicle cutting. I'll clean it up a little bit at the OK Corral. And this is what you have. The screws on out there. These media organizations would be ABC, NBC, MSNBC, public radio, public TV. All these commentators, the majority of them, are lining up behind the program. So, including old Nate Silver, he's saying, well, Joe Biden, Bernie has absolutely no chance at all. Well, on the current setup, but one of the things you have to understand, Yogi Berra, you say, Yogi Berra, it's not over until it's over. And this is not over yet. And Bernie is now in a situation that's basically saying, well, we'll go as far as we can, and if the delegate count is out of reach, we'll, go silent. But that's unfortunate because, again, when Jesse ran his campaign, he ran it all the way to June. That's what we used to do. Robert F. Kennedy was, when he was murdered, he was on his way. They won California. He's on the way to Indiana. The Indiana primary used to be late. California was June, and Indiana was last. And some of these other places. What they've done is move these primaries up. California is done. Now we have Missouri. Used to be a pretty good primary down there. That'll be on Tuesday. And Mississippi never was. But Michigan, very important primary there. But they moved from a caucus to a primary. Now, here's part of the problem. And this is some of the so-called low-level logic. In a caucus, if you're running a grassroots organization, it actually favors that kind of organizing. That's why Bernie was able to pull an upset in Michigan, in some of these other caucus states. But by now switching to the primary, that causes problems, because who runs the damn primaries? The party, the Democratic Party. So in Iowa, they had a dodgy application from a company called Shadow, was run by proteges of the Hillary DeMonster Clinton. It didn't work out. They weren't able to steal the whole thing from Bernie there. That's not a conspiracy theory, that's the facts. And so then we went on out to Nevada. They were going to use the same dodgy application from Shadow. They abandoned that and went instead to Google Docs, and Bernie wins out the winner there. But they had these other candidates in there effectively blocking. The blocker, supreme blocker, was Mini Mike. But Mini Mike couldn't take care of the business properly, so Mini Mike, as they say, has disappeared. Now he's going to run ads for Joe Biden against Bernie, and then against DJ Trump. But part of the problem here with this whole thing is how far can Biden go? What's their plan too, in case Biden falls apart? And it's easy for Biden to fall apart, because DJ and the boys are going to run as many negative ads as they can buy, which is on to infinity. And at the same time, they're going to bring his son in there, Dodgy Biden. You think Dodgy was running as vice president. So all these factors in there, and if you look at some of the, anywhere from Goldman to various other business polls, they thought that DJ Trump, with the economy that they had before COVID-19, that the economy was not great, and consumers were starting to slip out of it, so to speak. The redundancy, unemployment numbers were a little higher, but at the same time the rate was down. They had 3.5, 3.6, 3.7. It makes the actual rate about 7%, 7 whatever it is, and looked at it to use 6 rate. Anyway, Trump used to bring that up, doesn't bring that up anymore. But now, numbers management, we have that. It is on our macroeconomics side, where we get assistance from Cranston Analytics there. So nonetheless, the economy now, and it's a very interesting situation. Incidentally, go to my notes here. The price of petrol, or the futures, Brent crude, dropped, depending on who you talk to, 31%, because Saudi Arabia said, look, we're going to sell at a low price. We got plenty of it, and that's where we are. We're going to sell it. We're not going to lower the price. They had a big dispute between members of OPEC, Russian Federation, etc. So they're going with low price of commodity. How this will affect American producers, the ones that use the fracking system. Supposedly, they used to say their break-even was around $50. Well, they're not going to get $50. But they got plenty of the black gold, so to speak, there. So they hope to try to, as they say, push through this. At the same time, Dow futures were down, 1,000 points. And the S&P was going, but the computer stopped it. So it'll be another down day. How these down days will affect the U.S. economy? Well, a lot of that is we're in the first quarter. We have to look at the second quarter. We'll get some of the effects, and some of the third quarter there. Now, where does the Fed stand? We talked about some things the Fed could do, including digital cash. Person there, Levine, I believe his name. I'll have to put his paper up there. He delivered at the Shadow Open Market Committee. Anyway, that's some of the ideas out there. Yes, they've cut the interest rate 50 basis points. They could cut it another 50. I think they have that much room there left. And we get basically into negative interest rates. And they put in some quantitative easing. Yes, they can. And there's a proposal that they buy treasuries up. But now to let them buy equities. So that's one of the proposals they have out there. Tax holidays, all kinds of gimmicks. But none of these gimmicks will, in the end, work out. Now, another scheme is, and this is classic pump priming here, that's kind of like the tax cut is during the Bush administration, and several people have done that, where effectively they gave a grant of say $500 to $1,000. Same thing is happening in Hong Kong. They did the same thing, gave every citizen roughly $1,000. Well, yeah, they could do that. People would spend that immediately, but at the same time, you have Southwest being canceled, millions of dollars there lost to the merchants in Austin, Texas. A hockey tournament, I think women's hockey in Canada being canceled. Some other events being held in stadiums that are empty of people. You're going to see more and more of that. That's back to Dr. from CDC's social distancing. Well, a lot of distancing being involved there. So you have people out in Washington State and now Oregon. Oregon has a small number of people, incidentally. But at the same time, in Washington State, out to Waxahachie, that is going out towards Spokane in western Washington. Used to live in Washington, the geography there. So those are some of the things that's happening, stretching the healthcare system out there. Well, yes, if you gave people that's a little bit of stimulus. But those ideas worked when we had the banking crisis, recovery situation there, where they put effectively $1 trillion to the rich there because of the way the banking system was all tied up. Incidentally, we TARP, they call it. We supported TARP, and the only reason we did was all the banks were tied up with the rest of the finances, and had all these jokers went, then there would have been a situation where the government would have picked it up. They'd have had to get just USA Bank. That would have been it. And the ability of the government in the short term to guarantee deposits. What they did do at one time, what was it, 100,000? They increased that to 250. That's off now. 250,000 guaranteed just in case, and that was only to one account. Now, if you had several accounts at the same institution, you were out of luck. So people had to go around. A fellow came to see me. He had to go into, he was liquid, I think $1 million or something like that. He had to go to 4 different institutions to put his cash. So those are some of the things that happen. But now, are these things going to work here? No, because part of the problem is that you have these 14-day isolation periods, so what do you want to call them? And the people on the ship that's off of the bay, what's happening to it, they will be later today moved to the port of Oakland, which is a container port, and some of the U.S. citizens will be taken to military bases. They will be tested and taken there, and they will be on their 14-day or whatever it is, mandatory isolation there. Now, the crew and people that are from other countries, they'll be arranging charters to take those people back to wherever they're going. And the people from California will be going to a California base. And that'll take 2 to 3 days to get that done. So those are some of the things that are going on. But what that means is, now those are probably all retired people that could afford it, but a lot of people are going into these, like the young doctor going into the 14-day isolation period. Will they be paid or not? That works into the economy. Some people are going to have to pay mortgages, rents, etc. Some of the states are going to try to work things out. But effectively what they're going to do is go to the public treasury. The Trump people do not want to do that. Because not only are they anti-science, they're anti-people in the sense that they cut Medicaid. That is where you get people into the healthcare system because they'll afford it. They want to cut back certain parts of Medicare. And this is when Bernie talks about these, you don't hear from him anymore, but the characters that at one time wanted to balance the budget. That was when the conservatives talked about balancing budget. Well, that was Esther Bowles. He was a Clinton man, later became president, I believe, of North Carolina University. But anyway, he was pushing this so-called balanced budget thing. You aren't going to hear any more balanced budget anything because tax cut broke that open, and now there's going to have to be a lot of spending on the virus and to upgrade the health care system. They got, $8 billion. They're going to have to go back and get $10 billion more because they will not have enough. They bought some to do some things, but the whole thing is they're going to have to come up with some type of program for sick leave for people, particularly if this goes up in clusters of 300 or 400. They don't have to be a lot, but they still have to have a mechanism for taking care of that. And when you start talking about $300 million taken out of the Austin economy, well, it's a big hole in the Austin economy. And the eateries and those kinds of people, they get into the job thing. That's going to force some layoffs. And as social distancing goes on, and at the rate this is going now, if you went into quarantine this week, you'd be effectively in quarantine the rest of March. So in other words, that's a scrub. And some of the schools will be out all of March and into April. So that's where they will be. So it's a very important situation. We didn't have any polling, but if you go to Friday, the week that was, you'll get, I believe, some of the latest polling. One was out of Missouri, and Joe Biden was way ahead there in Missouri. And if you get out of, who else we got? Michigan, one poll had Joe Biden ahead by 4, and margin of error, but the others had him way ahead in Michigan. Michigan's very hard to predict, but it is easier to predict from a primary that's run by the Democratic Party of Michigan that opposes Bernie Sanders. That's the kind of situation that they now have Bernie in, and Bernie and his management team has to think about this. Jesse Jackson, incidentally today, Jesse Jackson out of Chicago endorsed Bernie. Of course, Bernie had endorsed him back in the 80s when he ran for president. So we have to look at this not from progressives, have to look at this not from the traditional situation. You got a candidate out here that's within this party, but you got a candidate that's running a movement, and the responsibility there is to continue on until the end of the primary so everyone can get their vote in. A reasonable situation there, and then on to Milwaukee. That is the movement. And whether or not Bernie endorses and helps Joe Biden, well, that's Bernie. We're not in that. I'm not a member of the Democratic Party. So again, that is a different situation. So we as progressive people build a movement, organize the people, and then you have, as even President Obama had to admit, that not only are we talking 2020, we're talking 2024, 2028 to get these people organized and start looking at things like the healthcare system, talking about student loans. She'd be willing to pay a little bit more tax to erase those. What that does is erasing some of those student loans, or forgiveness, what they want to call them, that enables people that in the next 20, 30 years will be paying the taxes in the U.S. That's the whole idea. That's why we had the GI Bill. That's why we had FHA loans. Unfortunately, FHA loans were redlined, and African Americans primarily were excluded from it. But African Americans did get the GI Bill at that time. Nonetheless, on to Bernie Sanders, ABC, CBS, etc. We have an open source report coming up, and also we're working on this is the selling of the Democratic Party. Have a good week. Boston Red in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. Good day.
You know, Senator Sanders likes to say he'll need a record turnout to defeat Donald Trump. He's right. And we're the campaign that's going to do that record turnout. If you want a nominee, we'll bring the party together. We'll run a positive, progressive vision for the future. Not turn this primary into a campaign of negative attacks, because that'll only re-elect Donald Trump if we go that route.
Joe Biden in Missouri yesterday, and we're joined now by his last remaining opponent, Senator Bernie Sanders, joins us from Grand Rapids, Michigan this morning. Senator Sanders, thank you for joining us. Boy, what a difference a week makes. When you joined us last Sunday, you were leading in delegates, looked poised for a big lead coming out of Super Tuesday. Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, Michael Bloomberg, all still in the race. How surprised were you by Super Tuesday, and how do you explain it?
Well, one of the things that I was kind of not surprised by is the power of the establishment to force Amy Klobuchar, who had worked so hard, Pete Buttigieg, who really worked extremely hard as well, out of the race. What was very clear from the media narrative and what the establishment wanted was to make sure that people coalesced around Biden and tried to defeat me. So that's not surprising. We are taking on, George, as I think everybody knows, the establishment. We're taking on the corporate establishment. We're taking on the political establishment. And what you are seeing now just in the last few weeks is Wall Street, the healthcare industry, the billionaire class putting a lot of money into Joe's campaign. But at the end of the day, you know what? I think we're going to win this thing. We won in California. We won in Utah. We won in Colorado. We won in Vermont. We won 3 states' popular votes before that. And I'm looking forward to the primary here in Michigan and in the state of Washington, other places as well.
But as you know, Joe Biden now has a majority of the popular vote as well from all the states that voted. He won 10 states on Tuesday. It wasn't just the establishment, it was the voters as well. And now he's got a new endorsement just this morning. Here was Kamala Harris.
One of the things that we need right now is we need a leader who really does care about the people and who can therefore unify the people. And I believe Joe can do that. He is a public servant who has always worked for the best of who we are as a nation. And we need that right now. There is so much at stake in this election, guys.
She is now the 9th former candidate to endorse Joe Biden. So it goes beyond the establishment. And as she made the point there that it's Joe Biden who is unifying the Democratic Party.
Yeah. Well, let me just say this. Later on today, we're going to have the support, I believe, here in Grand Rapids of Jesse Jackson. And as I think you well know, you know Jesse. Jesse has been one of the great civil rights leaders in the modern history of this country. He changed American politics with the concept of the Rainbow Coalition, bringing blacks and whites and Latinos together in '84. In '88, he has been a leader in helping to transform this country, an aide to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So we're proud. Look, we have the support of virtually every major grassroots organization representing millions of workers, black and brown and white. We have the support of a number of major unions in this country. This is no secret, George. You know politics. We're not going to get the support of most elected leaders, not most governors, not most senators. But we are winning the support of grassroots America because we have an agenda that speaks to working people. Our agenda says that health care is a human right. Our agenda is very different, and our record is very different than Joe Biden's. Joe Biden voted for the war in Iraq. I helped lead the opposition. Here in Michigan right now, the trade agreements like NAFTA and PNTR with China were disastrous. Cost 160,000 jobs here in Michigan because American workers were forced to compete against desperate people in Mexico and China. Cost over 4 million jobs nationally. I led the effort against those disastrous trade agreements, worked with the unions. Joe voted for those trade agreements. Joe has been in the past on the floor of the Senate talking about the need to cut Social Security, Medicare, Veterans Program as part of a so-called balanced budget effort. I strongly oppose that. I believe we have to expand Social Security. Joe is now getting his funding from at least 60 billionaires, not to mention a super PAC. We get our funding from the grassroots and working families, averaging $18.50. People understand the difference. We are in a crisis in America, not only in the need to defeat Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in modern American history, but to take on the greed and corruption of the corporate elite. That is what our campaign is about. It's very different than Joe's.
You outspent him on Super Tuesday. But let me pick up on one of the points you were making. You talked about Social Security. As you know, Vice President Biden has also said he wants to expand Social Security benefits, and the president has actually picked up on your attacks. Here was a tweet he sent out this week. He said, "I will protect your Social Security and Medicare just as I have for the past 3 years. Sleepy Joe Biden will destroy both in very short order, and he won't even know he's doing it." As I said, Vice President Biden said he's going to expand Social Security benefits. You don't take him at his word?
Okay. No, I do. Look, no, Joe is a friend of mine. And by the way, I have said that if Joe wins, I'll be there for him to defeat Trump. He has said he'll be there for me to defeat Trump. We're agreed on that. But I think in the course of a political career, members of the Senate, members of the House have to cast difficult votes. I cast a vote against the so-called Defense of Marriage Act, which was a homophobic act brought by the right wing. Back then, it was not an easy vote. Joe voted for it. I voted consistently against the Hyde Amendment, which denies women in this country the ability to control their own bodies in terms of abortion. Joe voted for it. So what I'm saying here is that people want somebody who has a history of standing up and making the tough decisions in tough times. The war in Iraq, it was not so easy.
I know you brought up the war in Iraq. Do you really believe there's any difference between you and Joe Biden right now on gay rights or abortion rights going forward?
Yeah, I think I have. Well, look, I mean, if you judge somebody by their records, I have been there. I have a 100% pro-choice voting record. I was there when the going was tough. Joe was not. In terms of gay rights, in terms of, as I mentioned, the so-called Defense of Marriage Act, it was not an easy vote, as you will recall. And when I cast and said, no, marriage is not just between a man and a woman. People have the right to marry whoever they want, regardless of their gender. That was a tough vote in Vermont. In terms of whether or not gays have the right, had the right to be in the military. This don't ask, don't tell, but I was on the right side of that issue. Joe was not. So all that I'm saying here, and I like Joe, I really do, is that people have a right to know who is going to be there when the going gets tough. Voting against the Wall Street bailout. I voted against that. Joe voted for it. There are real differences. It was also backed by
President Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Ted Kennedy, your own senior senator from Vermont, Pat Leahy.
That's right. That's right.
They're all wrong?
That's right. But it was, yeah, of course, what I said then, and I say now, you don't give trillions of dollars in zero-interest loans to Wall Street and large corporations all over this country. If you wanted to bail out Wall Street, the way you do it is ask the wealthiest people in this country who helped cause the crisis to start paying their taxes so that we could do what had to be done. And right now, the bailout of Wall Street, we bailed out Wall Street, and yet you got half of the people in this country living paycheck to paycheck. More recently, Trump is giving tax breaks to billionaires. You got 500,000 people sleeping out on the street. What our campaign is about is getting our priorities right and really finally having a government that represents working people and not just the billionaire class.
Let's look ahead to next Tuesday. We heard from Nate Silver at 538. He crunched the numbers and showed you have almost no chance of getting a plurality of delegates without a win in Michigan. Do you agree that Michigan is make or break for you?
No, I don't. I've been asked this make or break. As you well know, George, you know a little bit about politics. Make or break since Iowa, since New Hampshire, since Nevada. Every state is important. Michigan is very, very important. Last time around in 2016, I was told, impossible. You can't win Michigan. In fact, the day before the election, we were 20 points down in some of these polls. I think we got a great shot to win in Michigan. I think we got a great shot to win in Washington, maybe some other states as well. We got a long, long way to go to the Democratic nomination, and we're going to fight for every vote that we can get.
Final question. If it becomes clear, though, in the next month that you cannot get a plurality, you will not be heading into the convention with the lead, will you drop out or take this all the way to the convention?
Look, we will fight for every vote that we can as we try to win this election. I'm not a masochist who wants to stay in a race that can't be won. But right now, that's a little bit premature. Let's not determine what will happen on Tuesday or what will happen in the future. I think we got a great chance to win in Michigan, Washington, New York State, some of the major states that are coming up. And I think the people in those states have a right to cast a vote for the candidate that they want to see become president of the United States.
Senator Sanders, thanks for your time this morning. Of course, we're all going to be watching on Tuesday. Thanks very much.
Apparently was underestimating things, consider the Democratic race for president. Joe Biden started off as the frontrunner. Then after Kamala Harris had her moment in the first debate and sent Biden's numbers tumbling, Elizabeth Warren zoomed past Harris and briefly took the lead but faded just as fast, prompting Michael Bloomberg to become a center-left hope against Bernie Sanders. Until Bloomberg's debate faceplant left the surging Sanders as the prohibitive favorite, only to see him crash on Super Tuesday, leaving, that's right, Joe Biden as once again the supposed frontrunner. The states that vote over the next 2 Tuesdays would seem to put Biden on a potential glide path to the nomination. But remember, 8 days ago, that glide path seemed to belong to Sanders. And if we've learned anything, it's that this race can change in a hurry. Joining me now is the Democratic presidential candidate, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. Senator Sanders, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good to be with you.
Before I get to the campaign, I want to start with the issue of the spread of this coronavirus. What would your response look like as President Sanders?
Very different than what President Trump is doing. Unlike Trump, I believe in science. I would not appoint somebody like Mike Pence to be the head of the effort. Pence's record in terms of disease, in terms of HIV outbreak, was not a good one. We have to have confidence among state officials all over this country and people all over the world. So we need scientists running the operation, not Pence. Second of all, you cannot have a president who every day is saying absurd things. I mean, touting the fact, I think just the other day, that he is somehow very, very knowledgeable about an issue which he clearly is not knowledgeable about. We have to work with the entire world, reach out. We have to adequately fund the National Institute of Health and the CDC. We need regular reports coming from leadership in Washington, the state officials all over this country. We have to make sure that doctors, nurses all over America are protected as they do their job, because if they get the virus, we're going to be totally unprepared to deal with the general population. We don't have adequate test kits right now. We don't have ICU units, enough of them. Hospital nurses will tell you that they have not received the kind of instructions and preparations that they need. There's a lot of work to be done. But bottom line is, from Washington, the American people need to know that there are scientists, there are doctors who are running the operation, communicating with people all over the world, because this is a global crisis. We're not seeing that in Washington from Trump.
I just have spoke with Dr. Anthony Fauci. I know you know him well and know his reputation well. And he said the following this morning. He doesn't think people over a certain age should be traveling right now, particularly not going on cruises. If you have an underlying condition, that there really does need to be some sort of self-quarantining of sorts, or being careful going into large groups. Let me ask you this. Has your campaign made a decision on whether to hold large rallies right now?
Well, that's a decision. We just held a rally in Chicago yesterday, as it happens. We had about 15,000 people out. And what I will tell you, we are talking to public health officials all over this country. And obviously what is most important to us is to protect the health of the American people. This is an issue, obviously, not just for our campaign.
Right.
This is an issue for the National Basketball Association.
Sure.
It's an issue for every organization in this country that has large events. So all I can tell you is that is an issue that we are looking at, and we're talking to public health officials.
I was just going to say, who makes that call for you? I mean, if the state of, if a public health official in Michigan says, you know what, I know you have a big rally scheduled here, wherever it is, if they say don't do it, you're not going to do it?
Look, we're not going to endanger the health of anybody in this country. But again, this is an issue that every organization, every candidate has got to deal with.
Let me go to the state of the campaign, and specifically Michigan. Michigan was the start of your comeback the last time. How important is it to you this time?
Well, Michigan is obviously very important. That's where I am right now. I'm in Grand Rapids. We're going to be holding a rally later in the day in Ann Arbor. To my mind, I think we got a real shot to win here in Michigan, because the agenda that we are talking about is an agenda that works for the working families of this state. And furthermore, it really contrasts my views with Joe Biden. Now that we're down to a two-way race, I think it is clear for the American people to see where Biden's record is and where my record is. And one of the issues, as you well know, that here in Michigan, trade has been a disaster. Trade agreements like NAFTA and permanent normal trade relations with China, which forced American workers to compete against people who are making pennies an hour, has resulted in the loss of 160,000 jobs here in Michigan, some 4 million jobs all over this country. I helped lead the effort, as you may recall, against these disastrous trade agreements. I work with the unions, not with the CEOs of large corporations. On the other hand, Joe Biden strongly supported these agreements. And I think you could also take a look at these campaigns, and the people in Michigan understand this, how we raise our money. Joe Biden has received funding from some 60 billionaires. We're receiving money from working class people all over this country. And I think people instinctively understand that when you are indebted to billionaires and super PACs, you're not going to stand up for the working families of this country in the way you have to.
Are you concerned that Joe Biden can say, hey, look at the Obama-Biden administration did for the auto industry, and that counters your trade argument? I mean, and that is particularly in Michigan that will resonate stronger than some of your trade arguments?
Well, I don't think so. Look, obviously, everybody worked together to try to save the automobile industry. But right now, what you're saying is, in Mexico, the automobile industry is...
You voted against that bailout.
No, I voted against the bailout.
Yeah.
I did vote against the Wall Street bailout. You're absolutely right. Because I do not believe that the crooks on Wall Street should have been bailed out.
But that included some of those car companies.
Of this country. Yeah, I understand. Sometimes you have to make that choice. But the bailout was a disaster. My view was that the billionaires in this country should have bailed out Wall Street, not working families. And by the way, Wall Street got trillions of dollars in zero-interest loans, a direct gift from the taxpayers of this country. That was a mistake.
I want to get you to react to something, because you were talking about contrasting your record with Joe Biden's record. He's up with an ad that pushes back at you, particularly on Social Security. Take a listen to it.
Super Tuesday. State after state after state called for Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders goes on the attack. PolitiFact has called the Sanders campaign's attacks false. Negative ads will only help Donald Trump. It's time we bring our party together.
Now, I'm sure you know, it's pretty clear, I think, what the Biden campaign is doing. They're trying to make that any attack you do is helping Donald Trump. Do you accept that criticism? Are you concerned that the two of you could over-attack each other?
Look, Joe Biden is a friend of mine. He has indicated that if I win the nomination, he'll be there for me. I have said if he wins the nomination, I will be there for him. Together, we are going to beat Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country. But you can't. We live in a democracy, and we have to contrast our records and our ideas, our vision for the future. Here is the fact. This is undeniable. Joe Biden has been on the floor of the Senate, was on the floor of the Senate, time after time after time, as part of an effort for a Bowles Simpson, a very bad effort to try to control the deficit. And that included, this is undeniable, cuts to Social Security, cuts to veterans programs. Those are the words that Joe Biden used on the floor of the Senate. So when I say that I have spent my life fighting against cuts and to expand Social Security, that is a very different record than Joe Biden's have. I voted against the war in Iraq. Yeah. He voted for the war in Iraq. We have very different records.
On Super Tuesday, you have said when more people come out, you believe you will do well. Well, on Super Tuesday, where we saw spikes in turnout, it was Joe Biden that did well. You saw spikes of turnout of suburban voters, of African-American voters. We didn't see the spike in turnout in enough places of your voters. What's your explanation?
Well, my explanation is that we won in California, we won in Utah, we won in Colorado, we won in Vermont. I think the explanation is not complicated. The establishment put a great deal of pressure on Pete Buttigieg, on Amy Klobuchar, who ran really aggressive campaigns. Well, I know both of them. They work really, really hard. But suddenly, right before Super Tuesday, they announced their withdrawal. If they had not withdrawn from the race before Super Tuesday, which is kind of a surprise to a lot of people, I suspect we would have won in Minnesota, we would have won in Maine, we would have won in Massachusetts. The turnout may have been a little bit different. But I think what we are doing in this campaign, Chuck, is we are taking on not only the entire political establishment, we're taking on the corporate establishment as well. And I'm very proud that a year after I introduced this campaign, a campaign which has taken on Wall Street and the pharmaceutical industry and the insurance companies, you know what? We're just a few delegates behind Joe Biden, and we got a real shot to win this.
Final question, Senator. Can you win this nomination without the support of Elizabeth Warren?
Yeah, well, I certainly would love to have the support of Senator Warren, but yes, of course we can. We can win this because we are going to win the support of working people all over this country who agree with our agenda that, among many other things, the time is long overdue to recognize that health care is a human right in this country, not a privilege. We must pass a Medicare for all single-payer program.
Does it concern you that one of the hesitations it appears Senator Warren may have, as she told Rachel Maddow, is that that some of your supporters have been, I think she called it, pretty ugly, said some pretty dangerous things? Are you concerned that that is holding her back from supporting you?
Well, I am concerned about the kind of ugliness that exists on the Internet and the Twitter world in general. It is very ugly. And I will not deny for a second that we have some people who claim to be supporters, although I have a hard time understanding why they think they can support me and make vicious personal attacks against people. That's not what our campaign is about. But I got to tell you something. Take a look at the stuff that's coming into our campaign.
Yep.
Talk to some of the African-American women who are in my campaign about the racist and sexist crap that they have got to deal with. So it's an ugly world out there.
It is.
And I hope very much that in weeks and months and years to come, we can clean it up.
That is something I think everybody can endorse. Senator Sanders, campaigning in Michigan this morning. Thanks for coming on, sharing your views, and stay safe on the trail, sir.
Thank you very much.
Hello from Washington, I'm Chuck Todd, and thanks for checking out the Meet the Press channel on YouTube. Click on the button down here to subscribe, and click over here to watch the latest interviews, highlights, and other digital exclusives.